Can banning children from social media really prevent its dangers? Australia thinks so, and after adding YouTube to a list of platforms banned for under 16s, they've given tech companies 4 more months to develop age assurance technology. So will the likes of TikTok and Instagram step up to the challenge or face millions in fines for failing? I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is the Newsmakers. It's been an intense and ongoing debate for years now, whereby parents and governments have struggled to mitigate social media's sometimes harmful effects on children. Most recently, Australia stepped up, saying the onus is on its legislators to help parents curb their kids' consumption. Now, they will do so by making social media companies enforce age restrictions or face massive fines. So, starting in December, children in Australia under the age of 16 will not be allowed to legally access Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram, and others. But can it work? And is it really the right thing to do? Here's a look.
Social media companies have a social responsibility.
Time is ticking for Australia's social media ban for children, but uncertainties remain. Starting in December, teenagers under 16 won't be able to access many major platforms, though gaming and messaging apps are excluded. The Parliament passed the bill in just a few days last November, drawing criticism over the short consultation period. But the government insists the ban is necessary to protect kids from harmful content.
There is a place for social media. There is no place for predatory algorithms, and that's what we're cracking down on. And there is no cure, but this is a treatment plan, and this is too important for us not to have a good crack at it.
The new law will require companies to take necessary steps to prevent children from using their platforms and to deactivate existing accounts. If not, they could face fines of up to $32 million. But whether the technology to enforce these rules is ready is still in question. Trials are underway, and the options include ID checks and face recognition, which raises concerns about data privacy and whether it will even work.
With such a clear-cut ban, I believe that it will only create a generation of young people who will be more technologically literate in bypassing these walls and things that will be used to deter young people from using it by using fake ages and fake identification.
Some experts warn a total ban could push kids into darker corners of the internet. There are also concerns it might do more harm than good, cutting children off from positive content, social connection, and support networks.
The fact that we are limiting young people from accessing services that may in fact be very important to their health and well-being, especially if they're in a home environment that may not be supportive of them, I think it is our obligation to consider those negative impacts.
I think the main problem is the harmful content on the platforms, not so much the usage of the platforms.
Meanwhile, some Australians feel the government is overstepping its authority.
If people don't want their kids to use social media, you should just not give them social media, not give them devices and ask them not to use it. I don't think the federal government is to be involved in banning that sort of thing.
Many studies have shown that the use of social media can harm children's mental health. Online bullying, hateful content and exploitation put kids at serious risk. And Australia's pioneering law has inspired Norway to propose a similar bill, with France and the UK also considering bans. While there is a broad consensus that regulation is needed to protect children from online harm, the question of how is still contentious.
So will this ban bring the protection children need or find a way to backfire? Well, joining me now to debate that and much more are from Melbourne, Australia, Head of Policy at Digital Rights Watch, Tom Sulston. Also from Melbourne, cyber safety expert and former police officer Susan McLean. And from London, registered psychologist and founder and CEO of Private Therapy Clinic, Becky Spelman. Thanks all so much for being with me. First, I have to take a step back and let's just establish whether you think this legislation is even really necessary? Tom, how much danger are children in, and how much does the government have the right to intervene at this point?
Yeah, I think it's very important to recognize that there are problems with social media companies. They're very large, they're very under-regulated, and definitely there are harms that occur to children and young people on social media platforms. So it's entirely appropriate to regulate in that space. But we don't think a blanket ban for children and young people is the right answer. And I think we might get into some of the reasons why that is.
Okay, well, go ahead. First of all, you don't have to get into the reasons right away. We'll discuss those in a second. But do you think there's a better answer that's actually being ignored?
Absolutely. I think a lot of the problems that are caused by social media and the harms that are caused to children are also caused to adults. We have slightly better coping mechanisms, having been a bit older and a bit more experienced. But we think a better approach, rather than just a blanket ban, is to more tightly regulate the way that the social media platforms are allowed to behave in terms of their incentives. One of the reasons that we find a lot of toxic content on social media is the algorithm that decides what you see is designed to maximize engagement and therefore advertising revenue. But that means that a lot of content that is hateful and toxic, fake news, right-wing hate, that sort of thing, gets bumped up the algorithm because it drives engagement, and that can be pretty harmful to young people. And we think that removing the incentive to do that will be far more effective than just telling young people they're not allowed to use the social media platforms.
Okay.
So regulating the companies so they cannot monetize young people's attention, that would make it less toxic for them. It stops the social media companies from tracking children and the rest of us over the internet, and it forces them to treat us and our privacy respectfully.
Okay, let me ask Susan if you think that's a more realistic solution. I mean, because there's the argument now in Australia, this is a nanny state kind of telling parents how to parent.
Look, I'm in total agreement. This whack-a-mole approach is going to do nothing to make the internet safer for young people. It's going to give parents a false sense of security. I've already had parents say to me that they can't wait for the ban to happen because then they'll know what a safe platform is versus an unsafe platform, which is certainly not the case. And I agree, we need to make the internet safer for the user, and the algorithm is the most important one. If the negative content is not fed to young people continuously, we are going to dramatically reduce the likelihood of harm. That has to be coupled with education. We need to educate young people in digital literacy, how to use technology respectfully and responsibly. They need to know what to do if it goes wrong, because things go wrong in real life. It's no different. And we need to empower parents. Currently in Australia, over 80% of under 13s are on platforms they shouldn't be on with parental approval. So parents have already helped their children to lie. So raising the age to 16 is going to do nothing to address that whatsoever.
Okay, Becky, I mean, would you agree there? Because is this an issue of what's actually getting through that puts children in danger via these, potentially irresponsible social media companies, or the fact that children are constantly on their phones in the first place, making them vulnerable to just about everything, even the stuff that you can't say the social media companies are responsible for because it's just coming from their normal peers?
The thing that I'm the most concerned about is predators online, and the prevalence of child grooming online is huge. So even if we can just prevent a few children from experiencing some kind of childhood sexual abuse, then I think it's worth putting these bans in place. Yes, we cannot ban every single risky place online, but actually protecting children as much as possible where their brains have not developed yet. And often when a child is being groomed, the tactics of the abuser is tricking the child into making it exciting for them and thinking that they're actually going to be rewarded by participating in this kind of behavior. And then the person who's grooming the child gets access to the child in a way that they shouldn't. So actually putting these bans in place because of the huge prevalence of predators online means that we will protect a lot of children, and therefore I think it's worth doing.
Okay, so then back to Tom on the question of if it is worth doing, because the government has deemed it so, even if you disagree about the approach, how will they make this approach work? How can you even enforce it? The Australian government is saying it's on these tech companies and that they have until December now to come up with the technology to show proof of age. So can they really do it? Because attempts to launch what they're calling this age assurance technology so far have proven pretty mediocre at best.
Yeah, I think they have been pretty mediocre, and completely in agreement that, we do need to protect children from predators on the internet. That is very important work. The problem with this legislation is that it's likely to make the scenario even worse, because platforms will be able to claim that there are no children on their platform, and therefore they don't need to have child protection features. They might not need to have content moderation. They might not need to have help desks that you can call if you are having, an issue with another user on that site and you think they might be shady. They will be able to walk all of that back and legitimately claim that only adults exist on their platforms and adults can say whatever they like to each other. And that's really worrying. I think it's much safer for all of us, the children including, to know that we have those protections and they're available to our children. And yes, they're educated how to use them and how to get help if they are approached in inappropriate ways online.
Becky?
And that's particularly exacerbated by the fact that the age assurance technology is not there. And even if it works to a reasonable level of certainty, let's say it's 90% accurate, that's still 10% of children who will be able to make accounts on the platform successfully and use the tools. So there will be children using social media platforms after this legislation is introduced and after the age assurance technology is there. There will still be children on social media platforms, and they still need our support and our help. And this action takes that away from them.
Becky, does this action take that away from them?
I think, again, if we can only protect a few children, we've protected a few children, because we know that the aftermath of childhood sexual abuse, it causes so much trauma in an individual that we don't know how many people that we can protect with these laws, but I feel that children will be protected. And yes, people will flip through the net and they will still end up accessing these platforms, but there'll be a lot less children on them, which means that it just becomes harder for predators to reach those children. But sadly, we can't protect everyone.
Okay, Susan, is the argument of being able to save even just a few children, make it worth whatever sacrifices the larger online child population would have to make?
Oh, I've worked in this space now for over 30 years, and I'm very aware of what predators do and how they work. And part of my job in the police force was to go undercover and catch these people. Platforms that will not be covered in this ban are some of the worst for predatory behaviour, for the grooming of children and the child sexual abuse occurring. So we are delusional to think that by banning a tiny, tiny proportion of the internet is in reality going to do very much at all, because the predators will flock to where children are. That is in game chats, which are not covered. That is in server-based platforms. That is on WhatsApp. So for me, it is much better to tighten the access to educate young people, because we know through education, if we can stop a young person engaging with an online predator, give them the tools to be able to identify these people, that is the way to make them safer.
But
and of course,
Susan, is that not being done already? That seems like a no-brainer.
It is being done. And this is the thing. With this ban, there is only a tiny amount of platforms being covered. So for every platform that is mentioned in this ban, I can nominate 5 others that I deal with weekly where children are being groomed. They're going to slip under the radar. They're going to be the ones that the parents think, oh, it's not banned, so therefore it is safe for my child. We need to make the platform safer. And that's what we've seen in recent times. And I'm not going into bat for the platforms, but what I'm saying is there are a lot of mechanisms in place now within the platforms, the parental controls that the platforms have put in where a parent pairs their account to their child's, And we know that that offers a much higher level of safety. If a kid's on this platform that they're not meant to be on and they get into trouble with a pedophile, they're not going to want to tell a parent. They're not going to want to go to the police because they're going to fear getting into trouble for doing the wrong thing. And that's not the way to go. We cannot get out of this through fear, and we can't get out of this through controlling.
Becky, does that convince you otherwise, or do you still see the value in this blanket ban?
I totally agree that parents should be trained, advised, guided on how to speak to their children about spotting predators, because without that information, children are not prepared to be able to spot it, and they can't see where they're being tricked and lured into these unsafe situations. But I think we need many different approaches. We need the guidance, we need to guide parents, we need them to have really open conversations with their children. And I think these bans also help as well. Because again, if we take, I think this will actually help save a lot of children. It's not going to save every single child, but I think we need to do as much as possible to make sure that children are protected. And I have no idea how many children we can protect, but that's a number of children who don't go through horrific experiences where they carry that with them for life. And then we try to, I'm in a job because we have to mop up the pieces of people who've been sexually abused as children. So I think it's a combination of education and also restrictions.
And Becky, what quickly about the parents and whether this law is helping, the parents that I mentioned before who just cannot drag their children off their phones. I mean, you see kids have almost panic attacks when you tell them that you're going to have to take their phone away. If they feel disconnected for minutes even, they feel that there are social consequences that go with it that they can't deal with.
Parents need a lot of guidance, and if a parent is really struggling in that way, it's good for them to get support from parenting experts so they can learn tools and techniques so that they can consistently place boundaries which help change the child's behavior, and that it's done in a way where the child doesn't feel like it's a dictatorship. It should be done in a way where the child...
But won't this ban help those parents then by just taking it off the table? Snapchat, Instagram, the real constant contact ones.
I think it doesn't mean that the conversations are not still important, because online is still going to be a very dangerous place. And that means that parents should still be having these conversations where they're educating their children, they're speaking openly about what is grooming, what to look out for. So I think it's a combined approach.
Okay. Tom, let me ask you this, because there is an argument that we could be preventing a generation of young people from actually learning how to use technology in a way that educates them for the future. For example, how will they know how to use AI and these social media platforms if they're banned from using them, because they will still be relevant and necessary when they turn 16?
Absolutely. Children will find themselves cut off from large parts of society because everything happens on the internet now, and for a lot of people, social media is the internet. That's kind of your first port of call, your search. Maybe for a lot of young people, it's where you find your news.
Yeah, I see you do agree, Susan. The other opposite effect, though, that could happen, that we actually heard from someone in the report we featured, that this will actually have an effect of forcing kids to be more tech savvy and find ways around the ban, learning how to hack. So giving them some technological skills, but in a nefarious sort of way that actually could make them slightly more devious and make it even harder for parents to try and monitor and control what they see.
And I agree with that. And I sit on the Age Assurance Verification Trial Board, and we are preparing a report for the government to look at how this might manifest itself and what sort of options do the platforms have. And as was mentioned before, some of the options on offer are not highly successful. The number of participants that have been tested on these platforms, I think, is woefully low. I think we could have done a much better job. But again, this whole mess has been rushed. The government is hell-bent on getting this through by December without giving it sufficient time. I agree 100% with minority groups, children who find a community of support online. We should not be taking that out from under them. And I am dealing with distressed children every single day who are now panicking about the fact that they are going to lose their community of support. The other comment that hasn't been touched yet is consequences. It's bandied around as a law, but it's not a law. A law is something that the police can deal with. There can be someone arrested, someone can be charged. There is a consequence for breaking the law. But with this, the government have said, no consequence for the child for lying, no consequence for the parent for allowing the child to lie, and it's up to the platform to self-nominate that they have under 16s on it. So it's flawed logic, because there isn't a child in the world that is going to take themselves off these platforms willingly, knowing that even if they stay there, they can't be touched.
And Becky, is there also the risk of increasing pressure on parents to be that kind of, cool parent who lets their kids use their account so that they register as over 16 via their parents' account so they can still use YouTube? And then the parent gets to feel like, I can trust my child. I'll allow them on these social media platforms because I don't want them to be mad at me. I want to be the cooler one. And then there's a different kind of pressure actually put on parents, even though the point of this legislation was to really help take the pressure off the parents and leave it in the legislators' hands.
Well, that's a really good question. I think it could be compared to the parent who maybe has a glass of wine with their child and they try to gauge and they use their intuition. When is it appropriate to give that glass of wine and to sit with them and teach them how to drink responsibly, compared to, feeling like if they did the opposite, that their teenager would hide things from them and lie. So I think if every parent just tunes into their intuition and listens to their gut instinct and has their best intentions in mind, that their feelings can actually guide them in relation to how to have the right conversations with their child. And whatever parents do, as long as you're speaking openly to your children and teenagers and you're being as honest as you can and you're having this open dialogue, you can do a lot in terms of guiding your children.
Okay, Tom, final question for you. I know in Australia, among the government, they've kind of compared this battle against big tech in this space as something similar to what they went up against with the gun lobby when they decided to ban, most access to most guns, make it much more difficult to get a firearm. And the gun lobby was super aggressive. It was a tough battle, but in the end, it served the greater good and it protected Australians, especially children. Do you see those parallels?
I can see those parallels being drawn, but it's a bit of a long bow. We typically ban things that are bad, right? So guns are purely bad, cigarettes are purely bad, alcohol is purely bad, gambling is purely bad. We don't let children have those things because they're really not good for you, and guns are good for none of us. There's no upside. But the thing about social media is there is an upside. It's a part of being a human in modern life, is connecting with our peers over the internet and having conversations and sharing things and kind of learning and understanding about the world. So you can see why people would choose to make that comparison, because it's, certainly in Australia, the gun ban was a no-brainer policy that has wild support. This policy also has wild support, but I think it comes down mostly to that reasonable concern that parents want their kids to spend less time on their phones. They want something. This is something. Therefore, the government is pushing it through, regardless of whether it will help or not.
Susan, very quickly, do you think this will actually be instituted by, late December as planned?
They're saying it will be. They still haven't. The messaging from the government has been appalling. There has been so many mixed messages. And of course, it's not called a social media ban any longer. It's called a social media delay. they've picked the date of around the 10th of December, but they still haven't listed categorically what platforms will be captured, what it will look like, how it will look like, and how long the platforms have in order to implement any sort of age verification technologies. I would also be concerned about a parent who made the decision that it was okay for their child to use their account, because that is even worse, because the platform thinks the user is over 18. So that's an absolute misnomer to think that, oh, well, I can trust my kids, so I'll sign up for an account as an adult and let my 16-year-old use it or my 15-year-old use it. That puts them in such a dangerous place. There are no protections. There is nothing
on
to
YouTube,
protect
for
that
example.
child.
Though once you have an account that you have to pay for, you have to be a subscriber. It takes away all the advertising.
It takes that. The YouTube thing is interesting because that's only recently been added into the conversation, and it is about having an account. We know that kids are still going to be able to watch YouTube. That goes without saying. It's being the account holder, but again, it's the algorithmic content that gets pushed, and it's what young people can see if there are not protections in place. So yes, you can have restricted mode and safe mode, and you can limit stuff. But if a parent has signed up as a parent and then gives their child access to any of these platforms, that young person will be using it as a perceived adult.
Susan, that will have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists sincerely so much for being with me, and our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.